Imagine you are 8 years old. You wake up this morning and there is food in the kitchen. Someone made sure of that. There is a roof over your head, clothes on your body, and somewhere nearby, an adult who knows your name and is responsible for making sure you are okay. You did not earn any of this. You did not negotiate for it. It just exists as naturally as oxygen. Most of us grew up inside this invisible architecture of care so completely that we never once stopped to question it. But here is the thing that should stop you cold. For the vast majority of human history, the death of a parent was not a family tragedy followed by legal guardianship and a social safety net. It was, in many cases, a death sentence for the child left behind. A child without parents in the ancient world was not just sad. They were in danger in ways that are almost impossible to imagine from the comfort of modern life. So how did any of them survive at all? And what does the answer tell us about who we are as a species? Let us start by being honest about what childhood actually meant for most of human prehistory. A child is, biologically speaking, one of the most expensive and helpless creatures on Earth. Human babies are born absurdly underdeveloped compared to almost every other mammal. A foal can walk within hours of birth. A wildebeest calf can run with the herd on its first day of life. A human infant cannot even hold its own head up. It will be months before it crawls, over a year before it walks with any confidence, and well over a decade before it can meaningfully feed itself in a wild environment. This is not a flaw. It is actually a consequence of our enormous brains. We are born early, in evolutionary terms, because if we waited any longer inside the womb, our heads would be too large to survive the birth canal. The result is that human children require an extraordinary investment of time, food, protection, and teaching that lasts far longer than any other species on the planet. In ancient environments, where food required enormous effort to acquire, where predators were real and constant threats, where illness could kill an adult in days, a child alone was not just vulnerable. They were almost certainly doomed. And orphanhood was not rare, far from it. Childbirth killed mothers at catastrophic rates throughout human prehistory. Hunting, warfare, and accident claimed fathers. Disease swept through communities without mercy. Infant and child mortality was staggeringly high, which also means parental mortality was high. The ancient world was a place where losing a parent before adulthood was not an exceptional tragedy. It was a routine feature of life, which means ancient humans had to develop strategies for dealing with it because otherwise our species would not be here. To understand the solution, you have to understand something about how evolution shaped human social instincts. Humans did not survive because we were the strongest, the fastest, or the most physically imposing. We survived because we became radically, almost unnervingly, cooperative. While a chimpanzee will rarely share food with individuals outside its immediate family, and most carnivores raise their young with minimal involvement from non-parents, humans developed something unusual, a willingness to invest in children who were not their own. Evolutionary biologists have a term for this. They call it cooperative breeding, and humans are one of the very few species on Earth that practice it at scale. The theory, largely developed by anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy, suggests that human children evolved to be cared for not just by mothers and fathers, but by a broader network of individuals, what researchers sometimes call alloparents. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, and unrelated community members all contributed to raising children across evolutionary history. This is not charity in the modern sense. It was a survival strategy baked into our biology over hundreds of thousands of years, which means that the orphan in an ancient hunter-gatherer band was not necessarily abandoned to face the world alone. The band itself was the safety net. This is the core answer, but it is more complicated and more fascinating than it first appears. In small-scale foraging societies, the kind that characterized most of human existence, groups typically ranged from 20 to 50 individuals. Everyone knew everyone. Every child was visible. And the death of a parent triggered something that looks, from the outside, remarkably like a community-wide adoption response. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, including the Kungsan of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, and the Acta of the Philippines, consistently show that orphan children are absorbed into the social fabric of the group almost immediately. They do not become outcasts. They are redistributed. A grandmother steps up, an aunt takes over feeding duties, an older child becomes a de facto caregiver. The child continues to eat, continues to sleep within the protection of the group, and continues to be taught the skills they will need to survive. Archaeologists have found evidence of this going back astonishingly far. At a site in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, dating to over 50,000 years ago, researchers discovered the remains of a Neanderthal individual who had survived to adulthood despite having a withered arm, significant vision loss in one eye, and injuries that would have made independent survival impossible. This individual was kept alive by others, deliberately, for years. If even Neanderthals maintained community care for vulnerable members, it suggests that cooperative survival networks are far older than our own species. Now here is where it gets genuinely surprising. The first revelation is about grandmothers specifically, and their role is so significant that evolutionary biologists gave it its own name, the grandmother hypothesis. Humans are one of the only species in which females routinely outlive their own reproductive years by decades. From a strictly selfish genetic standpoint, this makes no sense unless the post-reproductive female is doing something else that increases the survival of her descendants, and the evidence strongly suggests that she is. Grandmothers in foraging societies are among the most productive food gatherers in the entire group. They are also the most reliable caregivers for orphaned grandchildren. The hypothesis suggests that human longevity in females actually evolved, in part because grandmothers who stuck around kept more grandchildren alive. The second revelation involves something called kin detection. Humans are remarkably good at an unconscious level at identifying biological relatives. We do this through subtle cues of smell, facial structure, and even voice. Research has shown that people tend to feel instinctive warmth toward individuals who resemble themselves or their family members, even when they have no conscious knowledge of the relationship. In a small ancient band where everyone was at least distantly related, this meant that orphan children were surrounded by people who felt, on some biological level, like family, because they actually were. The third revelation is about the social status of the child's parents. In ancient societies, reputation was currency. A hunter who had been generous, brave, and valuable to the group accumulated what anthropologists call social capital. When that hunter died, his children inherited a form of that goodwill. The community's care for orphan children was not purely altruistic. It was also a form of reciprocal obligation. You take care of my children if I die, and I will take care of yours. This informal insurance system was one of the most powerful survival tools our ancestors ever developed. The fourth revelation is darker but important. Not all orphans fared equally well. Children whose parents had been disliked, isolated, or low status were at significantly higher risk of neglect. Cross-cultural studies of historical orphan outcomes consistently show that social integration of the parents before death was one of the strongest predictors of child survival afterward. This tells us something uncomfortable but real. The ancient safety net had holes, and the children most likely to fall through them were the ones whose parents had already been on the margins. The fifth revelation is about the children themselves. Orphaned children in foraging societies often developed unusually strong social skills at a young age, something researchers have observed across multiple cultures. Children who lose parents early tend to show accelerated social development, greater attentiveness to adult cues, and stronger alliance-building behavior. Evolution, in its brutal way, may have shaped orphaned children to be particularly good at earning the care of non-relatives. They learned, faster than their peers, how to make themselves valued. And this is where the ancient world reaches directly into your own life, because you carry these instincts with you right now. The reason you feel a reflexive tenderness toward a child in distress, even a stranger's child, even a child in a film or photograph, is not purely cultural. It is evolutionary. Your nervous system was built over hundreds of thousands of years in an environment where caring for vulnerable children in your community was a survival strategy that benefited everyone, including you. The discomfort many people feel about child neglect, the instinctive protectiveness that rises when a child is left out or excluded the way a room full of strangers will collectively hold their breath when a toddler stumbles near a staircase. None of this is an accident. It is the residue of ancient cooperative breeding, expressed through a modern nervous system that does not entirely know it is no longer living in a band of 50 people on the African savanna. Modern adoption, foster care, and child welfare systems are, in a very real sense, formalized versions of a practice that is older than our species. The impulse to look after a child who has lost their parents is not a modern invention. It is one of the oldest human reflexes we have. We built legal systems and government agencies around it because the world got too large and too anonymous for the informal band to do the work on its own. But the instinct came first, written into us long before any law was ever written down. There is something worth sitting with at the end of all this. For most of human history, a child did not belong only to their parents. They belonged, in a meaningful sense, to everyone around them. Survival required it. The band that failed to care for its orphan children was a band that lost knowledge, labor, and genetic diversity. It was a band that slowly died. The bands that thrived were the ones where the death of a parent did not mean the death of a child, because enough people had decided, consciously or not, that this child's life was worth protecting. We are descended from those bands. Every single one of us. Which means we are, by definition, the children of communities that chose to survive together rather than alone. The orphan who made it through ancient winters, who was fed by a grandmother's hands and taught by an uncle's patience and protected by the warmth of people who had every reason to say it was not their problem, that child grew up and became someone's ancestor. Maybe yours, maybe mine. That is not a small thing. That is the whole story of how we got here.